those plates still had the tags on them, and they gave us chicken with meat on it. I mean, it was we were treated like kings, but it was the same fare. It was the same food. It was just they had picked out special food for us. There's what it looks like. What we didn't eat, you didn't eat the carrots or the celery or anything like that they could wash in their own water. Because if you ate anything, if you ate that water at all, you were going to be sick. And some of our guys were sick on the trip. You didn't brush your teeth in that water because there's parasites in the water that they could handle, but you couldn't. And if you brush your teeth in that water, you were going to be sick, and you were going to spend a lot of time in that other picture that I showed you. Well, the earthquake happened. This is a picture of where the earthquake was. Primarily, you can see, especially the 7.8 magnitude earthquake there and the effect that it had. And, you know, I always thought that an earthquake's effect went out in like concentric circles. But it doesn't. It can be greater along a fault line and follow that line. And that's why it affected things in that one direction, the east of the earthquake, more than it did in other areas. You can see Kathmandu is in a section that it was affected quite a bit by the earthquake. I'm going to show you a few pictures here. This was a Muslim tower. This is what it looked like after the earthquake. That was before the earthquake. That was after the earthquake. Over 200 people were in that tower when it went down. Over 200 people lost their lives in that tower. There was a tower that our leader had planned on us visiting the day before. Fortunately, the earthquake didn't happen, and we didn't get to see the tower at that time, and that was good. I didn't mind. We saw it from the road, but we didn't see it up close. On your left is a picture of one of the Hindu temples. On your right is that temple after the earthquake. You can see the damage. It's amazing the earthquake affected more Hindu holy sites and Muslim holy sites than it did anything else. And many of them were devastated. And you see that over and over again in these pictures. Before and after pictures of these sites. I'm not saying the earthquake was the wrath of God, and you know, and we taught in the churches, and we did not declare that the earthquake was the wrath of God. I believe that God can use any natural calamity for His purposes. I truly believe that. But I also think that we need to be careful about assigning bad things to God. You understand what I'm saying? Because there were many people that were injured and killed in these sites. Here is there's one of the TVs I saw. They don't have any flat screens there that I saw. That building right there that is now opened up. You wonder about public safety. That's the firehouse. And here's a picture. Well, do you see the way some of those buildings are leaning in? And people are still walking up and down that street, and there's tremors going on as they're walking up and down that street. It looked pretty dangerous to me. We didn't go down that street. We chose not to. There's some pictures of the destruction. Buildings that were housing people right up to the point of the earthquake. The earthquake happened in the middle of the day. And many people died in these buildings. Some of them totally flattened. There's a fire truck that didn't go out that day. There's another fire truck over there. There's the rear end of the fire truck and the firemen out in the safety of the open area there. The Nepal, the people there were not prepared for this magnitude of calamity, and there was tremendous suffering because of that. You can see some of the other buildings. These weren't buildings that were already fallen down. These were buildings that were intact and people were living in before the earthquake. And something you may not, that was a school at a driving school. Actually, a car from a driving school. Fortunately, nobody was in it when the wall came down on top of it. This is interesting. That is a Hindu rain god. They haul that around Kathmandu to ask God for rain. Well, you can see it didn't fare well in the earthquake. And they've got cables running over to poles that are planted to hold it up, and they're guarding it. It's a sacred, very sacred thing that's come tumbling over there. This is where we spent about 6 nights of our trip out. First of all, we started out in the middle of the grass field, and then after the rain started, we moved underneath this small roof. We figured if that roof fell on us, we'd survive that. If the house fell in on us, we wouldn't have survived that. There you can see people, they're living, their homes are in those buildings, but they're living out on the street because of the earthquake and because of the danger. There you can see some of them living under tarps. Tarps were at a premium. You couldn't find a tarp anywhere because all the tarps went immediately. And even when we tried to buy some for relief purposes and tried to buy some to take some of the villages that were hard hit, we couldn't find them in the town. Here's one tarp city. That was at the Catholic church there. Here's that's the field that we stayed in that night. It gave us an opportunity to speak with some of the folks in that field. That's again another picture of the tarps and the tents that were out there in the field where we stayed, and we got to minister to some of the people there. We had a bunch of Bibles that were in Nepal and English. Side by side, and so we spent some time marking the Bibles, the Roman road, the plan of salvation to the Bibles, and then we spent some time sharing with the folks what the gospel was, and had opportunity to share with the folks in that field about the gospel. There's 2 of our guys there, Mike and Nate. Sharing with 2 different groups of people in the field. I shared with one fellow, and I knew immediately that he was a well-educated fellow, and I said, "Are you a doctor?" And he said, "Yeah, I work for family planning." And he began to share with me he'd read the Quran, and he realized that there was nothing in the Quran that would speak against abortion. He didn't say abortion, family planning. And I said, "Have you read the Bible?" He said, "I'd be glad to share with you the Bible." And I talked to him for quite a while. He said, "Are you here by authority of the government?" And he questioned me quite a bit. And pretty soon some government officials showed up in the park. And one of our guys assumed that it was because I was talking to this guy that he'd called them. They were there for a different reason, fortunately, though. So I didn't get arrested. I didn't have to spend any time in jail, which is good. One of the fellows was really upset, not at the picture on the left. That was pretty normal. But he couldn't get a milkshake anymore. The Sunday shop, you can see the cracks. Many of the buildings will never be inhabited again and have to be torn down. I don't know what percentage of buildings in the city, but I'm sure that if we had American folks who was evaluating the safety of the buildings, it would probably be a very high percentage. I'm also pretty sure that because it's not going to be up to Western standards, that many of those buildings will be moved back into by people, and we will hear about them in the future someday. Here's a woman standing by one of the buildings. Here's some relief aid rice going into an area that's been devastated. This is one of the churches, one of our Christian churches there, made out of rocks and dirt, and it didn't fare well in the earthquake as well. It dropped. You can see how thick the walls are with all the rock and the mud making the walls, but that's not a very strong wall for a 7.8 magnitude earthquake. It's kind of shifting gears. The reason we went there is to do conferences with the Christian pastors and Christian churches, and we still got to do a couple of those. We didn't get to do the number that we originally had planned to, and we didn't get to drive to the other cities that we had planned to, but we did do one in Kathmandu, and we did one in Gauchi, which was just over the hill from where we were in Kathmandu. We met some wonderful folks there. This is this is a church building that God provided for this church. He's got quite a story about how God did that. Tremendous story of the power of God in doing that. Here we're meeting with a group. It's amazing. We have to plan meetings well in advance. We have to let you know. We have to promote it. And Bill said, this had better live up to the hype tonight. So I'm nervous. It's hard to get people together to church. These guys only had a few hours' notice to come to a 2-hour conference that turned into a 6-hour conference because they had so many questions, and they stayed there praising the Lord. And it was tremendous. It's tremendous. I want to share with you a little bit about what their service may be like. She gets up and starts dancing to the music. Would you like for me to do that for you? My family already said I have no rhythm, so. Hey, Sue. You recognize that word? Huh? Is that what it is? Isn't that cool? If we were to, as Christians, greet each other, we would take our hands like this. There were two greetings. One is where you say, get set, and that means may the gods be with you, or I see the gods in you. But the Christians say, Jemase. And what that means is, I see Jesus in you. Yeah. So every Christian you go up to, this is where you, let's try that. Everybody try. Jemase. Jemase. Isn't that respectful? Isn't that nice? And they do it clear across the room. If I was trying to say, I appreciate you guys being here. Jemase. Jemase. Yeah. Jemase. Yeah, Jimothy. They're gracious, wonderful folks. They have very little, but they have a tremendous lot. They're just wonderful, wonderful people to get to know. Here, Mark, the architect fellow who stayed a few more days to try to help evaluate buildings, their safety. He's teaching with the Nepal pastor. This pastor is the main pastor for this large church, but really he's the pastor for a network of churches. Began with just him and his group, and pretty soon it spread to 20-something churches, and then they do conferences now that start with 10 groups, and they end up with 30-something groups. I mean, you wouldn't believe how it's expanding there. The groups are 30, 40 people in each of them. It's really neat what God is doing.